That title came from, it is the actual title of this painting. So I'll start by reading that. Turning a train of thought upside down, or what we learn. And I have a Virginia Woolf epigraph. As a woman, I have no country. As a woman, I want no country. As a woman, my country is the whole world. Under the bottle brush tree, the lovers sit circled by each other's arms, all alone right in front of us, all on our walks around the city lake, their kisses blind to the afternoon, breathing down on them and us. I think of my own first love, how a woman can learn not to take but to give, how not to gain a self, but to lose one inside another. Natural as breathing, to be in exile under her own skin, colonized without knowing she was occupied. Long ago, women in my family carried bundles of wash on their backs, down to the creek bed to scrub it all clean, later balanced books on their heads for posture and the possibility of a cover shot on a fashion magazine, having been fed a diet of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, the Snow White tales. Just look at the statistics. How many of us have sported the split lips, bruised eyes, broken limbs? How many assaulted and betrayed? How many isolated and afraid? Our homes gone up in flames from so many hearts afire. Yet we have resisted and rebelled, conquered enemies, negotiated peace. We have also had our feet bound, bodies girdled and gagged, some buried beneath layers of cloth. We have been overthrown, dispossessed, imprisoned, enslaved, burned wholesale at the stake. We have also been venerated and feared, as Congolese leading warriors into battles with shields and spears, as Mongolians riding steeds armed with bows and arrows, as Seneca ruling the land and the clan, drumming and healing, as Balkans singing in the company of women just for the song. Some of us now build muscles in our legs and take to running for the thrill of the race, work them in our arms, wielding swords and wrestling whatever might confront us. We grow strong enough to carry ourselves to our own shade tree, dream beneath its leaves in the kiss of our own breath, learn to love ourselves deeply and with great abandon. I was going to read a couple of poems, other poems from other writers in this book, but they're here today and they're going to be reading them at the open mic. So I will go on to some other things. This poem is a shortened version of one that appears in this book. Joan Armatrading has a song in which she says, "There's a madman standing on the corner, and he keeps on looking at my window. Every key is turned, and every window is bolted from inside." And it goes, this shorter version is called "He's Always Just There." He's that midnight, deep sleep interrupter, phone call breather, grumbler on the line. Your shut window in the heat of summer, the hooked latch, dead-bolted door, handgun in the bedroom drawer. He's a neon vacancy sign turning on for a keyhole peek at you with your clothes off. A masked man, screwdriver sparking shadows at your catwalk landing. Or morning wolf whistles constructing your name as "Psst, psst, here, Miss Kitty." He's that man on the bus too close at the wrong stop, reflection steaming at the glass. Some guy giving you a ride to somewhere you didn't want to go, in a rush to get someplace else fast. He's the tour guide, driving you home before dark, when you could have seen Paris light up. This poem, Arroyo Literary Review, which is a local journal I recommend, comes out of Cal State Hayward. This will be in the Penn Oakland anthology called Fightin' Words that's coming out this year. It was happily a Pushcart Prize nomination. What about a fight? I have a cousin who started calling me out of the clear blue and reminiscing about family things that I felt like I was a stranger in my own history because I didn't know what the heck he was talking about half the time. And he started going on one day about what a great little fighter my father was and the best fight he saw him in and all. And I was really rather taken aback. And he said, write a poem about it, like everybody tells poets. So here it is. What about a fight? What is it that balls a man's fist into sudden rage? Jabbing and blocking, body weaving and swaying. A poker bet gone bad? Tiff over a last shot in beer? Wrong song on the jukebox? Something the other guy said years ago to the woman he didn't marry anyway? What is it when the brawl tumbles into the street, rubberneckers honking horns, grunting, oorah, even when one face is already kissing the pavement? No Sugar Ray or Ali. What drives the everyday Joe, digs in so deep, courses across scarred knuckles, broken tooth, blackened eye, flattened nose? They say my father liked to fight. Was it his old Judy record, trumping determination or hope? His annulled marriage to a bigamist, collecting veterans checks? Or layoffs at the mill just before benefits kicked in? A monotony of existence? What of those of us who years later toss and turn over brutal thoughts that won't abate? Still hearing the screech of a police car hitting the curb, the smack of the body slamming the asphalt. They say my father liked to fight. And as they carted him off to jail again, what of the wife? My mother behind the window's bent blind slat, who as the cruiser takes off, she thinking I am not there to hear her own wounded spirit sigh, says, finally, maybe now I can get a good night's sleep. This poem is set in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was written as a result of reading some of those slave narratives that were collected during the Great Depression. There's the epigraph is from a slave named Patsy Mitchner from one of the slave narrative collections called My Folks Don't Want Me to Talk About Slavery. Slavery was a bad thing, and freedom of the kind we got with nothing to live on was bad. Two snakes full of poison. The snake called slavery lay with his head pointed north-south, and the snake called freedom lay with his head pointed north. Almost anything can happen here in this poem. The sky bright and yellow with morning sun, a snake appear, cross sandy sweetgrass, coil in viney figs, stirring up the language of insects and birds. The wind sigh high in moss-hung cypress. A girl could arrive, coming to her nature, barefoot and naked, playing, singing, maybe dancing, others off picking, spinning, weaving, stitching. The soil's good, the honey is sweet, money in from the ships. The wind might rise, palmettos bow. Or it's near night, a veil of dusk on the seawall, quince flowering white, houses quiet as museum pieces, grand columns at porticos crested by crenellated parapets, dressed in piazzas, and cupolas wrought by indigo hands. Or there's a log hut with sand floor, stick and dirt chimney. The girls till a patch into moonlight for blue-eyed flax and long-legged grain. Eat ash cake and meat fat as butter. Sleep on a straw bed as sky slips in roof slits. Bright splinters of light stretched across rafters. The streets here are cobbled with voices of ghosts. On the tongue gullah slung in high-pitched riffs, low guttural moans. They are singing, weaving, fingers twisted about bone spoons, coiling row on row, or their backs bucked over barrels, skins striped in swipes of cowhide. The girl's mother could appear here, a wet nurse toting bundles, holding a candled stance of flowers, pitcher fixed at her head. Some bow to her who saw her crowned across the seas. And there's the block that centers the street for buying and selling, and gallows for hanging. Oh, it must grow dark and rain in this poem. The girl runs, bushes slap her legs, and field grows full of rain frogs, whippoorwills hollering treetops. A rack of north clouds, dark as crows rolling up the main road. A cannon thundering from a club hole in the sky. Another snake winds in, both meet at her feet. She shakes a bag of jack, rattling spells and chants and charms. They move in closer. The snake called slavery, his head pointed south. The snake called freedom, his head pointed north. Two snakes strike, both full of poison. Night stays on, a nocturnal nightjar, a long lullaby. The girl sleepwalks dunes, oyster shells in her palms held up to the moon, light up with the language of stars, dream of sky, everything black and eternal as cypress. Some things don't change. So that's, obviously steeped in our history of racism, but this poem is one about a little white girl that learns racism for the first time. It's called Bittersweets for Camellia, and it has an odd epigraph from Chief Justice Earl Warren from Brown versus Board of Education, which kind of states the obvious. Segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect. The classroom air choked with chalk dust and floor wax, but huddled in close outside on the fire escape landing at West Park School in McKees Rocks, we tasted chocolates plucked from inside the heart-shaped Brussels stover box where my mother hid her bonbons. A bite for you, a bite for me. The baby Ruths from the corner candy store cost you your milk money, Camellia. The outside melt the color of your hands. The nougats and creams inside light as my fingertips breaking into the chew. We hummed our sticky sweet delights stowed inside our butterick jumper pockets until the teacher flagged me across the stretch of cement schoolyard over to the iron gate that led back to your row house and my tenement across hopscotch lines chalked in, a clumsy journey, swings clanging against a school bell, ringing in the end of play for the day. Don't do that, the teacher whispered, like a secret, like a sin, words that traveled from a playground of a schoolhouse long raised in Pittsburgh, all the way to Charleston, when springtime were at the old slave market. I plucked from a ballast of stone a camellia, a scentless bloom that fell apart in my hands, flew in a flurry of spent petals into the wind. Don't do that. Words that confounded children in the sunflower state, finally able to walk together to school, or those giggling under cherry blossoms facing the sprawl of Capitol monuments, or others digging toes in sand along the Chesapeake Bay, sharing a peach, a bite for you, a bite for me. Or evenings, their chins perched on hands, listening together in the quiet to nightingales flowering the dogwood. But this bothers me now, Camellia. The last time I was in Pittsburgh, so many years after, I saw you boarding the 14C back to West Park, arms brimming with McCrory's store bundles, a little light-skinned girl latched to your waist. And I stood there frozen to the curb, unable to wave my hand, unable to raise my voice, dumbstruck by words drifting in from a teacher whose face or name I cannot recall. Don't do that, she said. It's bittersweet, still on my tongue. I'll end with this poem. There was a Ms. blog a couple of months back that was going on about all this hoopla about the new Gatsby movie or something. And there was this stuff about Fitzgerald's New Woman, which as much as all my friends liked Gatsby at the time, in the book and the movie, it always kind of got under my skin. So I guess I've finally been able to write something about that. So it's kind of an odd epigraph. This Naomi Shihab Nye has a poem in which she says, "How do you know you're going to die, I begged my mother. With strange confidence she answered, when you can no longer make a fist." So I went out to, I thought about my own mother, and I thought about these Gatsby women, and I thought about a lot of women that came after them in history. And I took a trip out to Richmond to the Rosie Memorial, the Rosie the Riveter Memorial, and looked around. I've gone out there a couple of times to see Bad Girls, Bay Area Derby girls race in the assemblage building where they were putting together boats. So it's kind of, this came out of that in some odd way. My mother, born into the flapper era, never bobbed her hair or sported drop-waist dresses with a cloche. Nor did she cover her face with pancake and rouge, lifting her skirt above her knees in speakeasies or on Gatsby verandas. She came of age in World War II, draped in white coveralls, hair wrapped in a red scarf under a hard hat, clear goggles shielding her eyes, while welding pressed steel boxcars near Pittsburgh. Like women in Toledo hauling Jeep parts to Ford lines, like those assembling fuselages on bombers in Long Beach, or for Boeing's flying fortresses in Seattle, like women filing bullets for the Army at the docks building Kaiser's ships in Richmond, or those feeding blast furnaces in steel mills, sparks flying at the giant cauldrons of molten steel. Like women on railroads and shipyards, the Liberty Girls as pipe fitters and riggers, bus drivers and mechanics, like those shooting riveting guns or ferrying planes, ratcheting with wrenches or lighting torches, arms linked across America, with the plains woman and the farm woman, the desert and mountain women, with the city woman, even with Marilyn Monroe, who as Norma Jean attached propellers to radio planes. My mother never jumped drunken in her clothes into a fountain like F. Scott Fitzgerald's New Women, but she did drop donning her mail-order rayon sheath from a rowboat into the lake, belting out the high notes of Indian love call at a USO picnic. My mother learned to love the night shift as a blackout air warden and became the woman who I would later reprimand for not divorcing herself from my father's fist or tongue. I had become the woman who no longer wonders how I dare raise my own fist and voice for rights at Take Back the Night rallies and marches. My mother was the woman who gave up a job tending other people's children for the rail yard, then factory, who relinquished the girdle to the rubber drive. She was one of the women who did not throw off the helmet or discard the payslip to run back to an apron. She went on living the rest of her life, making a fist as if she could do anything. Thanks. I'd like to introduce publisher of the anthology, Lucille Langday. People often refer to Lucy as an institution in poetry because she's just, her reach is so wide and her experience so long and her work so beautiful. So her most recent poetry book is Curvature of Blue. She has a children's book, Chain Letter, and her memoir, Married at 14, was this year selected as a Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award. So we have 2 Penn Oakland Award winners in our salon. Her poetry has appeared widely too: Atlantic Review, Hudson Review, Three Penny, California Poetry, From the Gold Rush to Present, New Poets of the American West. And as I said earlier, she has a Scarlet Tanager Press that produced this wonderful anthology. So let me introduce you to Lucille Langday.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say I'm really proud to be the publisher of this anthology. And I'm very appreciative to Andrena, who put a lot of work into editing it, and also to all of the Salon members who were contributors, and also there are other women who are Salon members who donated their time and talents to bring this out, including Judy Wells, who will be reading next, and who was on the editorial staff and gave her careful eye to these poems and helped us out. I'm going to start out by reading my own poem from the anthology. It's an autobiographical poem, and it's called Returning to the Bouchard Gardens. 50 years ago, rushing ahead of my parents and friend Sharon, I ran down these same paths edged with lobelias and blue poppies on Vancouver Island. Sea hollies bobbed like small purple pine cones on stalks. Canna lilies waved pink silks. Begonias danced in several shades of red. The sunken garden, once a limestone quarry, overflowed with dahlias and hydrangeas. I'd never been in an airplane. No one had a cell phone or computer. No one had walked on the moon. What have I done these 50 years? Fell in love with a field of wild irises and a boy I met at Al's Drive-In when I was 14. Wore a tight blue satin Chinese dress to our wedding 7 months later. Bore a daughter while pink and lavender Mariposa tulips opened. Left my husband. Stapled lids to chicken dinner plates for a living. Missing the Blue Runner Violet's spectacular display. Married the same man again at 17, while slender sunflowers nodded their yellow heads in an autumn breeze. Left him again in spring, when fire poppies ignited the coastal range. Learned to solve differential equations and identify the parts of a flower. Pistil, stigma, style, ovary, anther, filament. Fell in love with a man who said at a party, "You look like you want to dance." Married him in a meadow by a redwood grove where chickweed looked like drifts of snow. Bore another daughter, measured the electrical potential across the membrane of an egg cell of a mudwhelk. Wrote technical manuals, left my husband. Taught students to distinguish between monocots and dicots by the veins in their leaves. Interviewed scientists, wrote about how the universe bloomed from a single seed. Ran a health museum, wrote poems filled with wildflowers. Fell in love again. Married him under a canopy whose poles were twined with pink, red, white, and yellow roses. Held bronze urns containing my parents' ashes on a hillside above the bay. Read Bambi, played Candyland, and watched Cinderella and Dumbo with my grandchildren, while seasons changed and the rhododendrons in my front yard grew heavy again with bell-shaped flowers. Of course, Mrs. Bouchard's gardens look different now. Smaller, the roses no longer in bloom. Arched trellises, once laden with red blossoms hanging over the path, are wound with empty vines. I reach the end, the Italian garden, so genteel with its walkways and cross-shaped central bed of marigolds and peonies, just before the gift shop. But I want to go back, so I run to the head of the path and make a mad dash, sprinting now, back toward the sunken garden for one more look before the delphiniums and begonias fade. So I call that the abridged form of my memoir. And I also have copies of the full-length version here tonight, Married at 14. And so I'm going to read now a couple of other poems from the anthology, And I'm going to stick with the wildflower theme, not necessarily wildflowers, but the flower theme. And so next I'm going to read Cargador de Flores, Diego Rivera, 1935, and this is by Susan Cohen. It's him, in peasant whites and on all fours, pinned under the weight of his towering wicker basket. He stares at the floor of the museum like a mule. This man who overlooked my childhood from a print above my parents' bed, he's still burdened by blossoms piled so high they shove his sombrero down over his brows. As a girl, I admired the woman, how she leans to adjust the basket that's fixed to her man's back by a yellow sling. Rivera draws my eye from the folds of the sling to the folds in the woman's cream-colored shawl, then upward to her lowered eyes. My mother must have read love here in all its colors, while my father saw a laboring man knocked to his knees. I can hear my father humming Spanish Civil War songs, Union hymns, choruses from battles he would never risk his family to fight. I can see my mother tugging up their bedspread, securing its perfect daily crease with pillows, as the painting keeps retelling old stories about the loads of love, of a man who will never unshoulder his basket, of a woman who will always be bending to help, of a wife who cannot keep herself from worrying each knot tighter, a husband who wonders how flowers turned heavy as stones. And the next one is called Below Isberg Pass, and this is by Patty Trimble. Each summer, I imagine myself a voyager to the unknown. My high meadow wilderness, some beloved green sea, my heart a gyroscope that spins to the high view where river runs to cloud. I must go there in those brief and fragile months. I must memorize flowers that hang from threads, columbine, cinquefoil, or the tiniest white daisies. But where I once thought the sky trembled, the boulder shivered for every god in need of a home, I now believe it shakes in fear of me, and see behind me deepening trenches across this earth I meant to love.